Okay, we're going to talk about the scope a little bit, how to use it. Sun just set, so I'm going to try this now before it gets too dark for you to even see anything. There's a scope, it's all covered, doors open, so let's go in the observatory. And although you've seen this before, here we go. We've walked in, we're going to align the door, we're going to latch it shut. Then on the outside, I'm going to get this ready. There we go, we popped in, and we're locked in, ready to go. So, there's the scope. It's got the cover on. It's all plugged in, not turned on, but always make sure to turn it off when you're done with the evening. So let's take off the scope cover. The scope cover fits pretty tightly on the scope. So I'll say that here, and I'll show you why here in a second, because there's some parts that we might want to put on that need to sort of be taken off to get the scope cover on. Here's the scope, there's the mount, the optical tube, the hand controller, and what I was talking about a second ago, the hand controller has a nice little cradle, and the cradle goes right here on the side. So I can slide that in place. You got to take that off to get the scope cover on. So I'll lay it up here, and then that can sit down in. This is a cover up here. We'll take that off in a second. There's a finder scope. One thing I want to mention right now is the scope has what is called clutches. So right now the clutches are engaged, just like a clutch in a car. So if I try to turn this, the gears are locked in. You know, the tube's stable. There's a clutch here on the side. If I turn it and loosen it, the tube's going to float free. So there's a little handle down here. Just make sure if you loosen the clutch, you've got a hold of the scope. You can see how it's just moving on its own. We don't want it swinging too wildly, but we can just sort of move it. And then I'll loosen this clutch, and again, we can move like that. So, this back here is the eyepiece. You can change out eyepieces. I think there's a couple of different ones in the box. There's a couple of screws, loosen screws. Out comes the eyepiece. You can put a new one in. There's filters that go in eyepieces. So that's in. Just when you're done, just make sure you tighten it back up. This is a diagonal. It basically bounces light, so it's easier to see out the telescope. If you want to move the diagonal, like side to side, just loosen one of these two set screws. Again, make sure you tighten it back up, or else this thing will go flopping. This right here is the focus knob, so you turn it one way or the other to focus the object that you're looking through the scope. This is the finder scope. It's got a really wide field of view, and it's got crosshairs. So when we align the scope, we use the finder because it sees a big section of the sky, like 5 degrees or so, whereas this might be half a degree. So a lot bigger field of view, helps us find objects. This right here is the front cover. When the scope's not in use, you should always have this on. It just protects it. There's the big, well, the mirror's down in there, and here's a glass cover. It's actually part of the optical system. Might look dirty, but don't worry. They have to get really dirty before you ever do anything to them. So, the last thing probably is power. Here's a power cord. It's plugged in. Power supply plugged in down there. To turn on the scope, just hit that little button. See the little red light come on? And then the display up here will come on the hand controller. Hand controller plugged into the one that says hand controller. These other jacks, if you're going to do astrophotography or use a computer, you may use those, but for the most part, probably not. So, how do we align the scope? So, we talked about this earlier, where there's different menu options. So once the scope boots up, it has no idea where it's at. With GPS, it knows it's here, but it has no idea how you pointed the scope. Right now I'm pointed probably a little bit more northernly. I think west is to the left over here. So we got to sort of tell the scope where it's pointed, and we do that through the alignment routine. So right now the scope's wanting us to go through an alignment routine. So I'm going to hit enter to start that. And then I have different alignment options. Sky Align always comes up first. That's 3 stars, which could take a while. Then there's an auto 2-star, and then a 2-star, and then a 1-star, and then solar system. And that's the one we want. So we're going to hit enter. And I just say pick solar system because if a bright planet is up, like Venus or Jupiter, they're easy to align the scope on. Right now it's connecting in through GPS to get its location and update the system clock with the latest, with the current date and time. So that flashed real quick, and it's going through the list of objects that are up right now. Venus is first, and I'm just going to select that by hitting enter. Now I got to point the scope at Venus. So Venus is sort of like right there. So the first thing I'm going to do is open the dome, or move the dome over to where Venus should be. And last night we did a little bit of stargazing, and Jupiter and Venus were like right over that tree over there, somewhere in there, somewhere in here. So to get the scope on Venus, I could use the hand controller here and just motor it. And I think I did that last night. A quicker way is to use the clutches, so because it doesn't care. So I can just loosen that clutch, and now I can just go, which is way quick. And I can't see Venus right now, it's still too bright out, but let's just say Venus is up a little bit higher. Again, we can loosen the clutch, and you can just sort of point it. There's a couple of screws here and a couple here. There's sort of a line. To get it sort of pointed in the general direction of Venus, I just sort of sight like right up along there, and then hopefully you get Venus. And then once it's close, that way, you want to look in your finder scope and get Venus in there. And so you might use, bump it, something like this, to get Venus in the finder scope. And then once it's in there, you've got crosshairs, so you might do a little bit of bumping with the crosshairs. And then once Venus is like on the crosshair, like right in the center there, what you do is you hit the enter key. So that's the first step, in the sense that the scope is moving pretty fast. But we want to get it centered in this eyepiece in the second step, and so as soon as we hit enter, it sort of goes into slow mode. It doesn't move as fast. And so now when I bump it, it's making micro adjustments, more micro. And so the next thing is to get it centered right here in the eyepiece, and when we're happy, I'll put it back over here, we hit the align key, and it says align success, and it's all ready to go. So it's happy with things. From then, you're just picking things. There's a whole menuing system here, different objects, Messier objects, Caldwell objects, planets. We're just sort of on planets. So let's say we wanted to stick with planets. I hit the planet menu. Well, actually, we're already there. And then I can go scroll up and down. So there's Venus, there's Jupiter, there's Saturn, there's Pluto, and that's what's in the list right now. The list only shows what's up above the horizon. So if there's stuff below the horizon, you're not going to see it in the list because you'd be looking at the ground. So let's go down. Let's say we want to go to Jupiter. You just find it in the list, and then when you're ready, you hit enter. And the scope will go fast, and then it'll start to hone in on Jupiter. If you look at the control, you see this little bar that's sort of spinning around. When it stops spinning, Jupiter should be in the center of the eyepiece. So it stops spinning, it should be right there. So that's basically it. You're finding things that you probably do need to know what you want to look for. Just pick an object sounds great, but you never know where you're going at in the sky. You could be going over here, and then over to here, and then back over here. So you need a little bit of knowledge of the sky. And then as we discussed, the scope will always track an object. So if I just left it on Jupiter and came back 3 hours later, the scope would be pointed, well, Jupiter is set by then, but on some other object it would continue to track. The dome won't, so you're going to have to make adjustments from time to time. You know, maybe moving the dome so the shutter opening is in line with the object that you want to see. When you're all done for the evening, just back over here, really the only thing you need to do is power off the scope. So we just hit the little button. Again, I would put this, take its little hand controller off and lay everything. If you want get it in a certain direction, you can, that's up to you. Doesn't really, you can just leave it the way you would, or left where you stop. The only thing I would do is you want the optical tube pointed up. And, well, before I do that, you actually let the front cover on. Let's go get the cover. And so the cover, there's a little post here. There should be a post here, it's missing. So you'll probably have to get a new one, but you put that in there and it should, and then it locks in. This side won't lock because it's missing the post. Then after you get that, you can point it straight up. Because if you don't, you won't get the scope cover on. And then finally, in here, we're just, I don't know how this will show up in the video, but getting the scope cover on. Anyway, you'll be able to slide it down. So you take a little bit of getting over the finder scope, and then after that, you're all the way down. And you're all set. So there's the quick introduction on how to use the telescope.